What happens when a poor, landlocked country decides it no longer wants to bow to the world's most powerful financial institutions? Burkina Faso has done what many African nations only whispered about in the corridors of power. It has walked away from the long shadow of the International Monetary Fund. For decades, the IMF dictated Africa's economic path. Loans tied to painful conditions, policies designed in Washington or Paris rather than Ouagadougou. The results? Industries dismantled, currencies devalued, and millions trapped in poverty cycles. But today, under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso is boldly saying, no more IMF chains. This is not just a slogan. It is a real, calculated strategy that has sent shockwaves across West Africa. The young leader is tapping into something most leaders fear, financing development without the IMF's crutches. And the story of how he is doing it might be the biggest African economic revolution in decades.
The IMF and World Bank, those Western gatekeepers, have confirmed in their latest reports that Burkina Faso's unprecedented economic growth in 2024, driven by improved security, agricultural transformation, and a bold rejection of colonial exploitation, is real, undeniable, and a blazing rebuke to every doubter across the continent. This is not just news. This is a thunderclap of African pride, a wake-up call for every son and daughter of the soil to rise and reclaim our destiny. When Captain Traoré stood tall in 2022 and declared that 70% of Burkina Faso's territory was back under government control, that 700,000 internally displaced persons, IDPs, have been resettled, and that over 2,000 schools have been reopened, the cynics sneered. They called him a liar, a fantasist, a young upstart who couldn't possibly deliver.
To understand the significance, let's step back. Since the 1980s, the IMF has been the doctor prescribing medicine for Africa's economies. But instead of healing, the medicine often made the patient weaker. Farmers in Burkina Faso remember when IMF reforms forced the removal of subsidies, making fertilizer unaffordable. Students recall when education budgets were slashed in the name of fiscal discipline. The IMF called it structural adjustment. Ordinary Africans called it suffering without end. Burkina Faso lived under these chains for years. Every loan meant new restrictions. Every bailout meant handing over control of policy, until now. Traoré's message is clear. Burkina Faso must produce its wealth, not borrow it. His government has declared gold, cotton, and agricultural produce as strategic assets that will finance the nation directly. Instead of mortgaging the future to IMF loans, Burkina Faso is building state-owned enterprises, entering resource for infrastructure deals with trusted partners, and channeling revenues into projects the people can see. One striking move was the creation of a national gold refinery in Ouagadougou. For years, Burkina Faso exported raw gold to Europe at giveaway prices, while importing refined products at a premium. Now the country refines its own gold, keeping profits at home. Another bold initiative is the cashew apple processing plant in Penny, launched earlier this year. Once discarded as waste, cashew apples are now being turned into juice and other products for local and regional markets. It's a small project, but symbolic of the philosophy. Use what we have, keep the value here. But here's the risk. Turning away from the IMF is not just an economic move, it's a political gamble. The IMF is backed by the US, Europe, and global financial networks. Refusing its money can mean sanctions, withheld aid, and diplomatic isolation. Burkina Faso is already facing some of this fallout. Its break with France and ECOWAS has created tensions, but the government is betting that real independence, financing its own projects, using its own resources, will bring more dignity than borrowed billions ever could. Think of it like a farmer who has lived on handouts for decades. Each year, the donor tells him how to plant, what to eat, even how to raise his children. But one day, the farmer decides to sow his own field, even if the harvest is smaller at first. That's Burkina Faso today. Burkina Faso's revolution is not only about money, it is about dignity. IMF chains were more than contracts. They were symbols of dependency. By refusing them, Traoré is saying to Burkinabe citizens, you are capable, you are not beggars, you can build your future. And across Africa, ordinary people are listening. From Accra to Bamako, from Kinshasa to Nairobi, whispers are growing louder. If Burkina Faso can do it, why not us? The question now is whether Burkina Faso's bold experiment can truly succeed. Can a poor country finance itself without IMF loans, without aid strings, and without being crushed by international pressure? We'll dive deeper into the mechanics of Burkina Faso's new financing model, how gold revenues, strategic partnerships, and even secret trade deals are reshaping the nation's path. But before we continue, I want to hear from you. Do you believe Burkina Faso can survive and thrive without the IMF? Or is this gamble too dangerous? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video.
For decades, Burkina Faso has faced immense agricultural challenges. Its farmers have tirelessly worked the land with outdated tools, battling droughts, poor soil, and unpredictable weather patterns. Food shortages have plagued communities, leaving many reliant on imports and foreign aid to survive. In all, we manage to eat 2 meals a day. One farmer laments, "Our children often cry because they don't eat enough, but we do our best to find them something to eat." This harsh reality has defined the nation's agricultural sector until now. A dramatic transformation is unfolding, driven not by external donations, but by a bold declaration of self-reliance. Over 1,000 brand new tractors have arrived in Burkina Faso, marking the beginning of a new era. Machines built for the land, built for its people, and built for a future of food sovereignty.
When you hear a poor, landlocked country is rejecting IMF loans, the first question that comes to mind is simple. Where is the money coming from? After all, Burkina Faso doesn't have oil like Nigeria, nor does it boast the vast consumer market of South Africa. And yet somehow it is finding ways to finance schools, roads, factories, and even military upgrades, all without turning to the IMF. The answer lies in 3 strategies: leveraging gold and natural resources, forging alternative partnerships, and cutting secret but strategic deals that bypass Western dominance. Gold, the lifeline of Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso sits on one of West Africa's richest gold belts. For years, multinational corporations extracted billions of dollars worth of gold, paying the government only scraps through taxes and royalties. Imagine having a treasure chest in your backyard but watching strangers come in, take the jewels, and hand you a few coins for your trouble. That was the Burkinabe reality. Traoré has changed the game. Under his government, new mining codes now force foreign companies to give the state a larger stake. On top of that, Burkina Faso launched its first national gold refinery in Ouagadougou, ensuring that gold isn't exported raw, but processed locally. This single move has created thousands of jobs, strengthened currency reserves, and brought millions of dollars directly into the national treasury. In effect, gold is no longer just Burkina Faso's curse. It has become its war chest for independence. Agriculture, from survival to strategy. Gold may pay the bills, but it's agriculture that feeds the people. For decades, Burkina Faso exported raw cotton and cashew nuts to Europe and Asia, earning little while importing finished goods at inflated prices. That model, designed during the IMF's era of free trade reforms, drained local wealth. Now the government is flipping the script. Small but symbolic factories are springing up. The cashew apple processing plant in Pini, shea butter cooperatives for export, and plans for cotton textile industries. The philosophy is simple: no more exporting raw wealth. It may sound modest, but this approach changes everything. By processing raw goods at home, Burkina Faso keeps jobs, skills, and profits within its borders. Every ton of processed cashews or shea butter is one more step away from IMF dependency. But gold and cashews alone cannot replace billions in IMF-backed loans. Here's where geopolitics enters the story. Burkina Faso is part of the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, with Mali and Niger, 3 countries that have broken ties with France and charted their own course. Together, they are negotiating trade deals that bypass ECOWAS sanctions, including joint infrastructure projects and energy exchanges. Russia has also stepped in. Military cooperation gets the headlines, but behind the scenes, Russian firms are quietly signing agreements to help Burkina Faso with mining, energy, and even grain supplies. China, on the other hand, is offering long-term infrastructure financing in exchange for resource access, deals structured outside IMF conditions. These partnerships are controversial. Critics say Burkina Faso risks swapping Western dependency for Eastern dependency. But for Traoré, the difference is clear. With Russia and China, deals are negotiated on a state-to-state basis, not dictated through IMF technocrats. Secret trade deals, quiet but powerful. Here's the part the international media often skips. Burkina Faso is experimenting with resource-backed trade. For example, Instead of paying cash for imports of machinery or fuel, it is offering gold or agricultural exports directly. This model, sometimes hidden under confidential bilateral agreements, reduces the need for hard currency reserves, which the IMF often used as leverage. Think of it as bartering on a grand scale. Instead of borrowing $500 million from the IMF at 6% interest, Burkina Faso can trade a fixed quantity of gold for the same value in infrastructure or energy support. No interest, no austerity measures, no foreign-imposed policy changes. Such deals are risky. If commodity prices crash, the country could lose out. But they also represent a bold workaround, breaking the monopoly of the global financial system. Building trust through tangible results. Of course, none of this would matter if ordinary citizens didn't see results. In Burkina Faso, people are watching closely, and slowly, they are beginning to notice. Roads are being paved, new schools are being built, local factories are opening. For a country long trapped in dependency, these visible changes create trust. It's not just about rejecting the IMF, it's about proving that independence works. One resident of Bobo Dioulasso put it this way:
Before they told us we had no choice but to borrow. Now we see that with our gold and our land, we can build. It may not be fast, but it is ours.
The risks ahead. Still, the road is not smooth. Burkina Faso faces enormous pressure. From Western sanctions, from ECOWAS isolation, and from global markets that remain tilted toward IMF-backed economies. Investors may hesitate, credit ratings may plummet, and access to international financing could dry up. But Traoré seems prepared for this. His government's bet is that sovereignty, even if costly in the short term, will yield stability in the long run. And there's another layer. If Burkina Faso succeeds, it sets a precedent that terrifies international lenders. If one of the poorest countries can stand without the IMF, what excuse remains for richer African nations still in debt traps? We'll examine the geopolitical earthquake this move is causing, how ECOWAS, France, and global powers are reacting, and why Burkina Faso's bold stance might inspire a continental shift toward real independence. Before we continue, what do you think of these strategies? Gold-backed trade, agricultural processing, and new alliances. Can Burkina Faso really build a self-financed future, or will hidden risks catch up with them? For decades, Burkina Faso's economic lifeline ran through Paris. The CFA franc, controlled by the French treasury, kept countries like Burkina Faso tethered to France's economic orbit. Every major financial decision, from currency reserves to loan guarantees, had to pass through French oversight. But Traoré's government, along with Mali and Niger, has broken away from that orbit. They are not only rejecting IMF oversight, they are also building frameworks to exit the CFA franc entirely. This move directly undermines France's post-colonial influence in West Africa, what critics have long called Francafrique. In Paris, policymakers see the writing on the wall. If Burkina Faso succeeds, France's grip on the region could collapse. What started as a political divorce is fast becoming an economic one. Washington and Brussels are watching nervously. The IMF, after all, is not just a financial institution. It is a geopolitical tool. Loans are leverage, debt is influence, and conditionalities are quiet instruments of control. Burkina Faso's rejection of IMF loans is a rejection of that entire model. And while Burkina Faso is small, the symbolism is big. If other African nations begin to follow, Western influence in the continent's financial systems could shrink dramatically. Already, European companies are losing contracts to Russian and Chinese firms. Already, U.S. diplomats are warning about the dangers of African nations turning eastward. But to ordinary Africans, those warnings sound hollow after decades of Western-backed policies that delivered little beyond poverty. Russia and China, opportunity knocking. On the other hand, Moscow and Beijing smell of opportunity. Russia is expanding its influence in the Sahel through military partnerships, but also through resource-backed trade. China, with its deep pockets, is eager to finance railways, highways, and industrial parks in exchange for long-term commodity access. Critics argue that this is simply dependency under a new flag. Supporters counter that at least these deals do not come with IMF-style austerity. No forced cuts to schools, no privatization of state assets, no dictated tax reforms. For Traoré's government, it's a matter of pragmatism. Burkina Faso cannot build in isolation, but it can choose partners who respect sovereignty rather than dictate terms. The African inspiration. But perhaps the most powerful consequence is not in Paris, Washington, or Beijing. it's in Africa itself. Ordinary citizens across the continent are watching closely. In Ghana, where IMF bailouts have sparked street protests, people ask, why can't we do what Burkina Faso is doing? In Kenya, where debt repayment consumes a huge portion of the budget, activists cite Burkina Faso as proof that an alternative is possible. In Nigeria, where IMF and World Bank policies shaped decades of economic reform, young voices online celebrate Burkina Faso's defiance. It is a reminder that leadership, even in a small country, can spark a continental imagination. The road ahead. Still, the road for Burkina Faso is steep. Breaking free from the IMF does not erase poverty overnight. Schools still lack resources, healthcare remains fragile, and terrorism continues to destabilize rural regions. Economic sovereignty does not solve all these problems, but it gives the country freedom to attempt solutions on its own terms. And that is the heart of the matter. For decades, African nations were told they could not govern their economies without IMF guidance. Burkina Faso is proving that wrong step by step, refinery by refinery, deal by deal. This is not just an economic story, it is a story of dignity. Of a people saying, we are not children to be lectured, we are a nation that can stand on its own feet. The question is whether this bold experiment will endure and whether others will join. So, what do you think? Is Burkina Faso lighting the path for a new Africa free from IMF chains, or will international pressure crush this independence before it takes root? Drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more stories like this, and share this video to spark the conversation across Africa and beyond. Because what happens in Ouagadougou today may decide the financial destiny of an entire continent tomorrow.